Yo ho ho! I recently finished playing UFO 50. Earlier this week, I did a tier list on this channel ranking the games. And spoiler alert, but Party House did pretty damn well. I've now got more than 10 hours progress on Party House. I've won it with all characters. I've maxed out the capacity of the party, and I'm currently on a 20 party winning streak on endless mode. So I think I've had a pretty decent amount of time to form opinions about who's hot and who's not in terms of party guests. So I thought I'd put together a tier list showing my opinions. Um, Quickly, just to describe the tiers. So I've seen a few of these tiers, and some of them have incorporated the star guests amongst the rest. Some of them have put them at the bottom. Initially, when I was trying to put this together, I was putting the star guest among them, but I was finding it really difficult to do because fundamentally they've just got a very different role than the rest of the characters. I mean, on the one hand, they're very inefficient in terms of their cost for what they do, for the different sort of attributes they have. But on the other hand, so that sort of would put them towards the bottom of the table. But on the other hand, you literally need them to win. So instead, I decided to put them separately, and because they're completely necessary to win, I decided to put them at the top. It doesn't necessarily mean that when I see them, I'm as happy to see them as I am for these SA and the ones that are going in SA and B tier, because we know we're guaranteed two of them. But still, I thought this is where I put them. So S tier are going to be the guests which every single time I see them, I'm going to be using them. That always have very substantial value. A is for ones that whenever you see, you just get a little bit of a boost of serotonin. Most of the time, you're going to be using them, but you just think, okay, when you see them, you think, okay, you're more likely to think this is going to be a good run, especially when it's partnered with some of the ones in S. B is ones which are a bit more selective, but under the right circumstances can be very strong and can be one of the strongest players, or perhaps ones which are just very reliable but unspectacular. C is probably the closest to what is a filler tier. These are generally not going to be like big difference makers, apart from under very specific circumstances. But you might use them. If you're just needing to top up on certain, parts of your build. D are ones which are not completely useless. They do have their use, but are definitely like towards the lower end of things, are more situational, or are less useful than the ones that are at the table. And E are ones that I've not actually managed to find a use for. And although I've won with all the characters, these are the ones that I basically just put in there to fill it out rather than to actually serve a purpose to help me win any of the games I've played. I will say I think this game is very well balanced, which is one of its strengths. So there's not many in E. But yeah, I think some are better than others. Obviously, some have the strengths and weaknesses, but generally speaking, there's a few exceptions to this, but generally speaking, even the ones which are sort of weak in some way, the strength they have does a good job of compensating for that. So let's get started. So I think it's actually quite helpful that we're starting with the alien, because it's really the baseline star character. Obviously, it's in the first scenario, it's the star character given, but it's got 40 cost, and basically all of the other star characters, they have a value relative to the alien. So there's some which are more valuable than it, but bring some kind of benefit that the alien doesn't have, and there's some that are less valuable to it, but that cost less than it, but have some sort of drawback that the alien doesn't have. So when we're thinking in this start here, how we're going to place things relative to the alien, we're going to be thinking of, for the additional cost or for the cost saved, is it worth it? Is it commensurate to the gain or drawback it brings to the deck? So athlete, I think, is going to be a C. Actually, maybe a B. So I think something important to sort of say out of the bat is probably the most important resource, the most important thing, the most important attribute um, in this game is money, is bringing in money, because um, there's a lot of things that can deal that can raise popularity. You've got a lot of different options for raising popularity, which obviously you need to do. Um, I mean, basically, cards exist for five reasons. Maybe it's best to start like this. They raise popularity, they raise money, they deal with trouble, they are star characters, or they give you some kind of draw or fetch or something like that. Now, of these, the draw and fetch is useful, but it's not necessary. Um, the other elements are all necessary, and of them, there's quite a few. You've got a lot of options for raising popularity. You've got quite a few options for dealing with trouble, whether it's booting stuff out or replacing people, um, or obviously being a pacifist. But there's not many options for money, or at least there's fewer options. So the athlete isn't a very valuable card in terms of what it gives. One, popularity; one, money isn't very lot. But potentially on what you're in certain scenarios, it may be one of the best options you've got for money. If you've not got some of the other options, which I'm going to place higher up, it might just be the best the best option you've got. Actually, no, I'm going to put it down to C, because that is still quite situational. In most games, you're going to have a better way of generating revenue. Now, it does have the option uh, to take people outside, which it can be a good way of dealing with trouble. It can be our way of dealing with trouble. At least it's one of the less reliable ways to do that, and it matches up very well with a certain guest that we're going to be discussing a bit later, which is very valuable. But that's quite a specific scenario. So I think this is going to go right at the top of C. It's in this sort of middle filler tier. You're not going to be super excited to see it, but you're probably going to use it quite a bit. Now we have auctioneer. Auctioneer is an easy S. Like I said, money is the most valuable thing in the game. I mean, generally, how it's going to go is first you're going to want to get a way of generating money, and then as time goes on, you can focus more on generating popularity. So auctioneer, I mean, it's obviously towards the more expensive ones. We're generally going to find that the ones that are going on the higher end of things in the S and A tiers are going to be the more expensive ones, with some exceptions, because actually generally they're quite good value for the additional expense. But also, so 9 cost is something that you're probably going to be able to gain in 2 turns. And if you can have this guy, after two rounds, and he's generating 3 money, that means that every time, providing you don't run into issues with trouble, every time for those first few rounds, you're going to be able to upsize, which is just hugely valuable. Yeah, so definitely an S for an auction there. Definitely something which you see and you think, okay, this is great. I've got a good chance of having a good round here. And then we're very much front loaded in terms of the money makers here. You have bartender, which will be one of the very few which is going ahead of the auctioneer, because auctioneer is very, very good at the start, which is when money is most important. Money definitely, the value of money decreases as the game goes on. Because it becomes more expensive to get a new space, so each space costs more. But also because each space is less necessary, depending on what else you have in your depending on what else you have in your deck, in your Rolodex, I should say. Those spaces are going to become less valuable. But the strength of bartender is, unlike auctioneer that gives you the flat 3, bartender gives you the opportunity to scale your money. And it's the only way I can think of at the top of my head which gives you that option to truly scale your money. I mean, basically, if you see bartenders, and you have at least some option of dealing with some way of dealing with trouble, you're guaranteed in the late game to be maxing out your money every single time and getting those extra 2 spaces every single time, which is so valuable. So yeah, bartender's definitely one of the strongest in the game. Next, we have Cater, I think this guy's called. This guy's definitely a C, definite filler. Um, the use case for this guy is if you need to get popularity, but you've not really got other good ways of getting it, especially if you've not got a good way of scaling your popularity as the game goes on, because basically, if you have got a way of scaling it, it's not worth getting this guy because even if you ignore the money, well, yeah, when you consider the one money, the 4 popularity just isn't really worth it. You're gonna have better ways of getting that popularity without the money. And if you take like the baseline value of a guest as being 2 popularity, which is what a lot of these guests have, an additional 2 popularity for 1 money, it's not a great trade. I mean, the value of money, obviously it changes as the game goes on, but the value of 1 unit of money is probably somewhere between 1 and 2 popularity. So yeah, I guess you could say it's just slightly better than just a normal character that's worth 2 popularity, but a normal character that's worth 2 popularity isn't worth good. It's almost the definition of filler. So I think there aren't many games in which I'd use this guy. So C. Next, we have a celebrity. Now, a lot of people really hate the celebrity. I think the reason why people hate it is because it introduced more risk and more uncertainty, and people don't like dealing with uncertainty. I mean, basically, the whole game is about managing risk. But you start off with quite a lot of risk when you've got, proportionally quite a lot of trouble in your desk and in your deck. And generally, as you're going forward, you want to be reducing that trouble and making your turns more reliable. And the celebrity does the opposite of this for 2 reasons. One obviously, it exposes you because it gives you the chance of going over your capacity and having the fire marshal come in. And the other reason is, I think generally you want to play it so that you've got at least wiggle room of 2. You don't want to be introducing more people when the cat on the roof is going mental, and you've only got one trouble to go. Whereas the thing is with the celebrity, if you've got a celebrity in your deck, then all of a sudden it can be that one draw takes you over the limit, and that's not a good feeling. However, I mean, obviously it depends how you built your deck, but I would really play in decks that had more than, until the very late game at least, more than 6 trouble. And I don't know if I ever had one where I had more than 7 trouble. So the odds out of your whole deck that the 2 people that the celebrity draws are both trouble are actually very low. Maybe you remember it more the times it happens, but it's still very low. And the drawback of maybe going over is something you can manage quite easily if you only have 1 celebrity, and also it's true that if you have more than 1 celebrity in your deck, it also increases the risk of you getting multiple troubles, because basically if a celebrity prompts another celebrity, it goes from there being 2 slots for there to be troubles in to be 3 slots for there to be troubles in. And obviously the chance of having 2 trouble from 3 is a lot bigger than 2 from 2, even if the chance of drawing consecutive celebrities is quite small. And the more you have in your deck, I mean, the more that snowballs. So just celebrity has all these disadvantages. That said, its effects to balance out are very strong. 3 money, 2 popularity, is it? Or is it? Yeah, I think it's 3 money, 2 popularity. Or maybe it's the other way around. It's very useful, especially if you don't have a lot of other ways of generating money. However, I don't think I have ever introduced more than 1 in my deck, or certainly not from when I was new to playing the game, because I think the benefits it brings for only having 1 in your deck is sort of quite fair. But if you start to stack it and have multiple ones, then all of a sudden that benefit becomes not very worth it anymore. So I'm going to put it in D. All that said, because yeah, if you've got better options, you're going to want to use better options, and it has the potential to screw you over more than most cards. But I don't think it's quite as bad as a lot of people are saying it is. And I think the balancing of celebrity is an indication of how well balanced it is, because it has a very strong or a substantial negative effect, but the positive effect it brings you, I think it still makes you question whether you select it or not. So cheerleader is going to be A. I think cheerleader is probably going to be more high variance than a lot of the other ones I put in A. I think a lot of the other ones I put in A are going to be things that are pretty reliably useful. Now, cheerleader is obviously all about what other options you have in your deck. If you don't have any other things with actions, or if you only have very few, for example, if you have it in conjunction with the option to kick people out, which itself is a very powerful option, it doesn't synergize very well with the cheerleader and being able to do it again. Because normally, if you want to kick people out, it's quite selective, and if you start kicking too many people out, then you might not even reach your capacity. So really, the things you're looking to combine it with are the hairdresser, the photographer, and if you can get it in conjunction with one of them, along with some of these other things like the spy and the kicking stuff out, and fetching people, of course, then it can be the most valuable cards in your deck. And I think the most obscene run I ever had, where I just absolutely trounced it with 6 or 7 days left, was because I had a cheerleader in conjunction with, I think it was the hairdresser. So it has the potential to be probably the most powerful in your deck, but it all depends on what else you're drawing it with, which is why it isn't in this S tier. Now we have the climber. I mean, this is going to be no surprise to anyone. This is without a doubt the best guest in the game. Obviously, it is the single best way of scaling popularity. Like if you have a climber with one of these two, with a good way of generating money, or maybe even a spy or something like that, it's going to be very difficult to lose. You'll have to get pretty unlucky if you play it right. Yeah, I think actually this maybe the bartender as well, but this is maybe the only card I'd say isn't very well balanced. Is pretty broken. Like, put it this way, I think if its max popularity capped out at 7, it would probably still be the best card in the game, and if it capped out at 6, it would probably still be an S tier. So the fact that it goes all the way up to 9, and also it synergizes with the athletes and the grill master on kicking you out. I mean, if you can get like a few of these in and climbers, then all of a sudden within a few turns you can get these up to 9, and then the game just becomes an absolute cakewalk. The only drawback really is its cost. It's the most expensive in the game. But even considering that, like, it doesn't take too long to get going for you to be able to get these. And then once you're able to, it's pretty easy to be able to get these, even if you're building up some money economy first. It's pretty easy to be able to get these to the point where they're easily going to be able to pay off and mostly get to 9s or at least most of the way there by the end of the game. So yeah, a bit broken, to be honest with you. Now we have the comedian. I think the comedian's going to be a high C, because again, the reason you're going to be getting the comedian normally, I mean, the good thing about the comedian is, especially the time when you're going to want to be employing him, which is in that mid game when you've already got your economy sorted, when you've already got your way of dealing with trouble sorted, and then you're going to try and get enough popularity to get some of the star guests. By that point, you can probably pretty reliably fill it and trigger it, so you can probably pretty reliably get its 5 popularity because you've got the way of dealing with trouble. Obviously, this doesn't synergize very well with guests that add more guests, but you're probably not going to have too many of those in your deck. So, but the drawback of it is you might have better options for getting a lot of popularity. I mean, if you don't have good options for scaling, this is one of the best options for gaining popularity, for gaining a flat amount of popularity, which is why it's kind of top of C tier. But yeah, there are better options out there. And also, it's not something you're going to be getting in the early game. Okay, so now we have the counselor. So I'm going to put the counselor in E. Now, I haven't found a use for this guest yet. If anybody else has done, I'd be interested to hear it. So obviously, the counselor sounds really good because, what is the thing in the game which is your downfall? What is the thing in the game which you curse? It's when you have too much trouble. And oh, hey, we've got a card here which deals with trouble. Brilliant. But normally you're not going to want no trouble because, like I said about cards being well balanced, the cards that bring trouble do have the potential to cause your party to have to end, but they also have some pretty powerful positive benefits as well, which you don't want to check yourself out of. I mean, yes, of course, if you have this, you don't have to use it. Maybe you can say this is insurance in case you end up with too many troublesome guests early on before your other ways of dealing it have come into play. But you'd rather just have the other ways of dealing it. And also, when some of the most powerful mechanics in the game, like the bartender and spoiler alert, the writer, rely on you having a certain amount of trouble, then if this is a card that undercuts some of the most powerful cards in the game. I guess that undercuts some of the most powerful guests in the game. So yeah, maybe if you drew options for guests which gave you no other way of dealing with trouble, then you'd use this. But that's not something that ever happened to me, and there's quite a few ways of dealing with trouble. So yeah, for me, this was. Oh, and also it's not that cheap either. It's 7 popularity. Maybe if this was like a 4 popularity or 5 popularity, it would be something that'd be good for getting you through the very early stages. But even then, in the early stages, you're reliant on the wild buddies because otherwise you've just not got a way to generate a lot of popularity. And this card doesn't bring a lot of popularity as it is. So yeah, I think this card is pretty weak. Now we have Cupid. So Cupid's I guess that I really slept on because I didn't really understand how it worked. Like when I first heard it, I thought it did the ones on either side of it, and I thought, that's probably not going to be useful. And then I actually did use it, and I found out it worked. And it's like, okay, it's actually very strong. It's a good way of dealing with trouble. So I mean, it has its way. It's better than a standard like wrestler getting rid of it card, and it has its ways. It's worse. So it's better because it could potentially get rid of 2 troubles, although maybe that's not something you necessarily want to do because, like I said, the troubles do come with these powerful positive effects. And you don't necessarily want to be too much under your trouble limit because then you're potentially missing out on those positive effects. And it's also worse because you have to you potentially, depending on how your guests have lined up, you might need to get rid of somebody who's not causing trouble and you don't want to get rid of. However, if you're at the point where you want to get trouble out, you probably have quite a few, well, at least 2, obviously, but maybe more than that if you've got pacifists in there. You've probably got quite a few options, and then you've probably got quite, on each of those, you'll have one on either side of it. So you'll have quite a few options to get rid of, and there's probably one that's going to be next to something not that valuable. So that's not too much of a drawback. Another way this isn't as good as your other ways of removing people, if you're just removing a single person, is you're probably not going to use it for anything other than trouble. Like something like people like wrestlers are quite good for. If you get to an end of a party and you're at full capacity and you've not reached your trouble limit yet, you might want to get rid of your weakest. You might get rid of some old friends or stuff like that in order to just get a bit extra value out of your guests. Whereas you're probably not going to do that for this, because if you get rid of two non-trouble guests, it's unlikely that you're going to be at the trouble limit, so you're not going to be getting as much value by having those trouble-causing cards in there. And also, if you're getting rid of two next to each other, it increases the chance that you're going to have to get rid of someone good, and you might not necessarily expect that you're going to get a good return on that. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in B. You want to be able to deal with trouble. It's not the best way of dealing with trouble, but if you see it and if it's your only way, it's better to have than to not to have. Okay, now we have the dog. Cute dog, is that what it's called? Cute puppy, something like that. S, definitely. I mean, pacifist is such a strong ability because it deals with trouble. It makes your parties more reliable. You know, if you can get more of these in your deck, it means you've got more of a chance of getting these out early, which increases your chance of filling out your party, which increases your chance of getting more popularity, more money. And it also synergizes with the writer and the bartender as well, like I said, are some of the most important things in the game. And it's not that expensive either. It's seven costs, I think. So it's something that you can get pretty early, and it's 2 popularity. So it's sort of holding its own in that regard. It's not like it's taking up space from someone who could potentially be using up more popularity. It's still giving you a bit of popularity as well. So yeah, if you're getting this, obviously you always, if you're seeing this, obviously you're always getting it. Now we have the dancer. I think the dancer's like a C. Like dancers, I think one of those things which when you first see it, you think, oh yeah, this is great. Like getting 16 extra popularity every turn is great, but actually, obviously, it costs quite a bit of popularity to set up. When you've got the opportunity cost of you could be investing it in other stuff, and then even once you have it, you know, being able to reliably draw all 4, you're not always going to be able to do it. It's probably going to depend on draw, on using other draw cards, and with that you've got the opportunity cost as well if you're doing other things. So normally when I would get these reliably, you'd be getting 3 each, which is sort of okay, but the stronger options. I mean, even at the max 4, it's still not getting as many as the comedian. And obviously the comedian's got the condition attached to it. It costs money, but still, I think I'd rather have the comedian. So now we have the dinosaur. So I think the dinosaur goes below the alien. So it costs less. It's the cheapest. I mean, generally how I would do it, how I would get my star guests is I would start off getting the more expensive ones, because star guests are sort of filling up space in your deck. You know, they're not generally the people you want to be drawing. They're not providing the value until you need to be using them to finish the game. So if you have something like the dinosaur, which is taken up, even if it's cheap and you can get quite a lot of them early on, relatively speaking, it's taken up a space for someone else. And in the case of dinosaurs, it's even worse because it might be taking up many spaces, because it might be filling up your trouble meter early and preventing you from filling out of your party. So you're only really going to be getting the dinosaur, and this is generally true of the ones which have a negative effect associated with them, when you're right towards the end, when you've already got some of the more expensive ones. Also, because early on, or in the mid game, I should say, your economy, your ability to generate popularity is probably relatively slow. So much so that when you're getting at the sort of 40 mark, which a lot of these lower star guests cost, you can still comfortably have another round without reaching your limit and introducing inefficiencies in that way. So so yeah, so you are probably going to use the dinosaur, but you're probably only going to get 1 or 2 of them, and it's probably going to be only right at the end to fill it up. And even then, you're probably only going to get 1 if you've got other reliable ways of dealing with trouble and stuff like that. So for this reason, I think it's probably the star gas which when I see, like, I'm least happy with. Put it that way. So the watchdog. I think that it's a tough call between A and B. I think I'd probably say B based on my original criteria because when I see it, I don't get that hit of serotonin, but it is very useful. It's cheap. That's the two popularity is nothing to sniff at. It makes its money back in that way very quickly, and the spying is a very versatile ability, especially when it's combined with being able to boot people out of the party. Because you can use it to really optimize the quality of guests you're going to get. You can use it as a way to deal with trouble. Obviously, it's not as good at dealing with trouble as being able to beat people out and being a pacifist, but it is a way, especially if you can clear. Especially if you get lucky and you can use it to clear the trouble in your Rolodex, and then you can just reliably go the going forwards. So yeah, I think B. I think you're normally going to be getting, if it's available, you're normally going to be getting at least one of these. Now we have the dragon. So I think the dragon is worse. The dragon is similar to the dinosaur in as much as it has a pretty severe penalty, 3 money. And the reason I said auctioneer is so good is it gives you 3 money, so it's like a negative auctioneer. And you're not going to be getting it out the gate, maybe unless it's alongside the dinosaur. Because, like I said before, when it comes to the auctioneer and the bartender, money becomes less valuable as the game goes on. So if you get this as your first star guest, then that's going to have a significant impact on your economy and your ability to scale. But in the late game, if you've already got 2-star guests, you can get 2 of these in the same turn if you've got full popularity. Although, to be fair, if you're going from more than 30 to more than 60, your economy is probably doing less than 30, I should say, to more than 60. Your population generation's economy is probably doing well enough that it doesn't really matter who's available as a star guest. You're going to win anyway. But still, you can get 2 in the same turn. And then at that point, money's not worth so much. So normally, if you've got the dinosaur, you're probably going to get 2 or 3 of the other guests, and then just keep on getting these to increase your chances every turn of getting a star guest. So yeah, I'd say it's better than a dinosaur, but you'd probably still rather have an alien. So now we have what's this guy called? The driver. So now we're talking about fetch. So fetch is very, very powerful for retrieving these star guests. So in the late game, it's very, very powerful. But it's pretty powerful. It can be pretty useful otherwise. So this guy's got no other attributes apart from he can bring people. But I mean, it's a very versatile ability, put it that way. Like sometimes you could just need one person. Like you could be at your trouble limits. You just want to get a pacifist in. You could be needing some money and you've got a lot of trouble, so you want to get a bartender in. There's lots of different ways this can be useful. So basically, if you see one of these guys, you're definitely going to be getting it towards the end game, and it's going to make you substantially more likely to win. And in fact, because it's more universal than it's used in the cheerleader, I'll put it above the cheerleader. And potentially, depending on the build, the rest of the cards you've got available, you might use it earlier than as well. So yeah. Now we have the Gambler. So the Gambler brings in 3 money and 2 popularity. Like I said, money's very valuable. So frequently, the Gambler will be your best option for generating money. And for that reason, yeah, it's beta. It's good. If you've got a better option of generating money, you're probably going to use that. Depending on, if that method of generating money is a bartender, maybe you are going to include it because then you're getting the money from there and then the money from the bartender as well, providing you've got a way of dealing with the trouble. And the Gangster is obviously very similar. It's very hard to say who's better between the Gangster and the Gambler because, like I said before, the value of 1 money is between 1 and 2 popularity. So if you're getting 2 extra popularity for 1 extra money, then in theory that's better. But the abilities of the Gangster are more focused. Like more likely you're going to be like, I need to get more money and just more money, than you're going to be like, I need a sort of mix of money and popularity. It's more specialized. So I think for that reason, even though on paper the gambler might seem like it's more valuable, I think the gangster is actually more useful. Now we have the genie. So the genie is the most expensive star guest, but not only is drawing a strong ability, as I just said, but drawing is especially a strong ability at the time in the game that you're using. At the time in the game when you're gathering your star guests, because the other star guests which have positive abilities, the superhero and the leprechaun, well, those two in particular, because you've also got the ghost and the unicorn. But the superhero and the leprechaun, yes, 3 popularity is good. Yes, 3 money is good, but um, those are good. Those are good abilities to have early in the game. Early in the game because you need money early in the game, and money gets less valuable as the game goes on. And early in the game when it comes to popularity, because generally you want your popularity to scale as the game goes on. But so by the time that you can afford those star guests, those abilities aren't that useful anymore. But the time which you can afford this star guest is exactly the time when you want to have draw. And actually, if at the end when you have 4-star guests, if you have 3 genies out of those 4-star guests and you draw a genie, that's a guaranteed win because you can use a genie to draw a genie, genie to draw a genie, genie to draw you other star guest. So for that reason, even though it's very expensive, I think this is definitely stronger than the alien. Put it that way. Now we have the ghost. So the ghost is 5 popularity more than the alien, but in exchange for that, you're getting the ability to boot someone out, which is a powerful trouble control mechanism. But also, if you don't encounter trouble, this boots mechanism is very useful because basically these star guests, especially the ones from here on down, because they don't bring any popularity, because they don't bring any money, they're just filling up space that other guests could potentially fill. And by the time you're getting the star guest, potentially some of your other guests have a lot of value. So if you bring in a guest that if there's trouble, it can get rid of trouble. And if you've got problems with trouble, you can get rid of trouble. And if you've not got problems with trouble, it can get rid of itself to bring in space for a potentially valuable guest. I think that is a good ability to have. And I definitely think it's worth the 5 additional money. So I'm going to put it here. Now we have the old friend. So the old friend, obviously, it's the default card. It's not very exciting. It's not very special. I'd probably put it at the bottom of D tier, if not for the mascot. We'll get on to talking about the mascot a bit later, but in some circumstances, in some options of guests you've got, the mascot could potentially be your most important source of popularity. And it synergizes really well with old friends. So for that reason, that's basically the only reason you'd ever add more old friends to your deck, put it that way. Other than that, I don't think you put it in E because obviously it has a use. They get you off the ground. But other than that, once you get off past that initial phase of the game, it's going to be the card you least want to see most of the time. So it's going there. Grill Master, it's just the athlete but worst because you're getting a popularity instead of a money. So it has the useful effects of taking people outside as a weak trouble control mechanism, as synergizing very well with the climber. But the thing is about synergizing with the climber is it's sort of, what people talk about as like a win more mechanism. Because if you've got the climber anyway, you're probably going to win. Maybe there's some circumstances where, you only get a weak start to your economy, or you get unlucky, so you lose a few turns from trouble. And then at that point, it's quite late in the game when you get those climbers, so you need a way of scaling them up. In those circumstances, it is useful from the climber to have this get outside mechanism. But generally speaking, that's not actually going to make the difference between you winning and losing a game. So really, and also most of the time, it's not going to be paired with the climber either. So even though it has the potential to make a difference in that regard, yeah, I think it's an okay card. 2 popularity, pretty standard. But it takes outside. It's not that powerful in effect, but it's something. So yeah, it goes in the filler. To Hippie, really, I think Hippie's an S. Like, I think in terms of like how happy it makes me to see it, it's more in line with these A characters. But you are going to be getting the Hippie every time. I've not had a game with Hippies available where I've not used the Hippies, and most of the time you're getting 4 of them, or at least 2 or 3 of them. So yeah, it's not as exciting as these. It doesn't have maybe as high ceiling as some of these, but it's cheap, and especially in the early game when you have a potential, you don't have other ways of dealing with trouble. It can be really useful. So normally, if this hippie is available, I might get a hippie and then someone who causes trouble, and then a hippie, and then get some of the more expensive guests. So the greeter. So I'd be interested to hear other people's opinions on how they found a use for this guy, because to me, I just thought this guy was just useless. Probably maybe the worst balanced character in the game. Um, like I think something that would be good, that would be a good way to rebalance this guy, is if its gimmick was when you select it, the next guy that came through the door you could score, because that way you could combine it with some of the draw guys, the fetch guys, and use it to get someone valuable and then score them. But so you draw more people, you use it to draw more people in. So at that point, put it this way, it's an active ability, but it doesn't synergize well with the cheerleader, or doesn't synergize it that well, because if you've got multiple cheerleaders, especially, you're not going to want to use this guy until a few turns from your party being full, because otherwise you're not going to get the ability to reuse this guy's ability multiple times. But if your party isn't full, you're not getting the full value out of cheerleader, because potentially there's people with actions who haven't come in yet. And incidentally, you could say that's a flaw of the draw guy as well. At least when it comes to the fetch guys as well. At least when it comes to synergy with cheerleaders. Although that is compensated by the ability to boot guest as well. So it does depend on the circumstance. But most of the time, unless you've got quite a small deck, you're not going to be able to predict. Well, even if you've got a small deck, you're not going to be able to predict who comes in. I suppose you can synergize it with Spy a little bit, but even then, it's quite circumstantial. And the 1 popularity it brings on its own is not very valuable. That's not really something for a popularity-based guest you want to be adding to your deck. So yeah, I really couldn't find a use for this guy, but I'd be interested to know if anybody else find it useful. Now we have the introvert. I think the introvert's a B, because there were some times I found the introvert very useful. The introvert's very situational. If you've got a lot of good guests, if you've got ways of dealing with trouble, if you've got some of these S tier people, you're not going to be using the introvert, because every time you're going to be wanting your party to be full, and you're going to have a way of making it being full to get all your valuable guests in. However, if you've not got a way of dealing with trouble, if there's not a lot of good cards on show, if you have a way of generating money but you don't have a good way of generating popularity, then this guy's going to make the difference. Like, if you can find a way, again, you're not always going to be able to do it like the dancer, but so the difference between the introvert and the dancer is, even if you can only get 3, and I think a lot of the time you are only going to be able to get 3 out of the 4 in play. With dancer, you get 9 for that. With the introvert, you could be getting, I don't know, 30 for that. Depending on the situation. So in certain situations, the introvert is very powerful. Now we have the leprechaun. Oh, obviously the leprechaun and the dragon are very, very similar, very interesting to compare because they sort of do opposite things. I think I'm going to put it below the dragon. Actually, I think I'm going to surprise myself because, like, if you get the leprechaun with one of the weaker ones, one of the things which is like an alien or cheaper, that's kind of fine because you've got that. You can get the leprechauns to start with, and then you can get the cheaper ones to round it out. I think the reason why leprechaun is weaker is because if you end up with the leprechaun and then another one of the more expensive ones, you know, if you're going to have some of the more expensive ones, the leprechaun is probably the last one that you'd want to get, or one of the last ones that you'd want to get, because it's quite a bit more expensive than most of the other ones, and in compensation for that, you're going to be getting money, which, as we've already established, is very powerful, but it's less powerful as the game goes on. So I think a lot of the time, if I'm getting a leprechaun, I'm getting one of them, maybe two of them, and then going for cheaper options, because eh, as it gets further, the disadvantage of having one of the ones with the drawback gets less, and the advantage of having the extra money also gets less. Um, so for that reason, I think it's one of the weakest star guests. Now we've got the magician. Um, Very interesting to compare the magician and the fetch guys. You can come up with arguments why one's better than the other. Um, you know, you can more reliably use the magician as a trouble mechanic to get rid of troublesome guests. Although saying that, your upper limit for being able to deal with trouble with magicians is based on how many star guests you have. And if you're at the still at the point where using magicians for trouble is your main concern and not using it to find star guests in order to win the game is your main concern, you're not going to have too many star guests around. So your chances of drawing a star guest before a magician or before several magicians, if you're using that as a trouble control mechanism, is not great. I guess something that's better about the magician compared to the draw guy is you can use it to deal with compared to the driver is you can use it to deal with star guests, because like I said, in the mid game the star guests, they're more of a drag than anything else. They're taking up a slot that another guest could use and provide better value for. So they're useful for dealing with the dinosaur or the dragon if you have those earlier on. But like I said, you're probably not likely to be getting those until the end when you're going for the star victory anyway. So I think I would rather have the fetch ability. That said, these are obviously both very strong, and the real strength of this is finding star guests. And if you see this, it increases your chance to win. So it's in A. Now we have the mascot. The mascot's very similar to the introvert, where you're probably going to have better ways of generating popularity. You're probably going to have better ways of scaling. But if you don't, it could be your best way of generating popularity. And actually, unlike the introvert, and a reason why I might say it's better than the introvert is it's always going to be possible to use it. The introvert depends on whether you're going to have enough money in order to generate the space in order to make it valuable. But you're always going to be able to fill out your team with old friends, and that means you're always going to be able to make the mascot provide value. So yeah, it's not something I would use very often, but actually I might put it a bit bigger because compared to these guys, a bit higher. Compared to these guys, more often it's more like to make the difference between winning and losing, put it that way. And actually, for this reason, I'm going to move the guard dog down because the guard dog isn't often going to be it provides a useful utility. You're probably going to get it, but it's probably not going to make the difference between winning and losing. Well, there's definitely situations where each of these three guests can be the difference between each of these four guests to be the difference between winning and losing. Now we have the mermaid. I think the mermaid's good. I've already discussed why I don't think the drawing multiple guests is as bad a mechanic as some people make out. Often you're going to draw it before the end anyway, where it's not going to limit how many people you can draw in. Obviously, if you have other other popular guests, as they call them, I think, in your deck, it's going to be less useful and it's going to increase the risk. But you're probably not going to have other draw guests in your deck. And in fact, if you have this as option, it makes the other draw guests less valuable because it increases the risk of having them. It increases the chance that they're going to take you over. So you're probably not going to choose that. So, for the benefit of 5 popularity, in fact, maybe I'll just put it above the Alien because I think it's quite similar to the Alien because this it costs 5 more popularity. Is this going to cost you 5 popularity from not being able to fill out your party because you've not drawn it yet and you don't want to go up the limit? It's probably not, but it's probably not a million miles off either. And this is the only one of the negative guests. So the only one of the guests out of the dinosaur and the dragon and the mermaid that have the drawback compared to the Alien, which I'm probably going to be picking up right from the off and getting my deck in right from the off rather than waiting to get one of the more expensive guests to start with because the drawback isn't that bad. Now I have the monkey E tier for me, I think. Yeah, like it. Put it this way: it's a worse werewolf, and the werewolf isn't very good. It's cheap, but at the time in the game when you care about things being cheap, is the time when you've not got ways of dealing with trouble, so you've got the least appetite to be introducing trouble to your deck. And then in the late game, when you've got ways of dealing with trouble, 4 popularity isn't that valuable, and you've got better ways of getting popularity anyway. So I would say I can't see a situation where it would be good to get the monkey, to be honest with you, where there aren't going to be better options to fulfill the same role. Now we have Mr. Popular. So, yeah, again, I think like the celebrity is very well balanced in terms of it has a drawback and it has an appropriately good upside because the drawback is a lot less than the celebrities because the risk of stacking them is a lot less and the chain reaction effect that could have. If you don't draw them, the effective party size imposed on you isn't as big. It doesn't have the problem when it comes to wild to introducing trouble because in terms of introducing trouble, it's got the same effect as just opening your door anyway and having the chance to draw someone who's got trouble. But saying that, its benefit is a lot weaker. 3 popularity is only really going to be useful in the early game. And at that time, you're not that bothered about popularity. Money's more valuable to you. And also, it doesn't have the benefit of money, which, as I've been saying, is really valuable compared to celebrity. So I think it's less useful than the celebrity. But in some circumstances, I might just decide to throw one in. So it's not going in A. Yeah. Photographer is in B. I think I'm going to put it here. I wouldn't get this unless I also had the cheerleader, I don't think. Or one of these 2 guys. Yeah, I suppose if you've got one of these 2 guys, it's like effectively having an extra one of them with the drawback of it costs 1 money. So actually, maybe I'll go a bit higher. But then if you have the cheerleader as well, you have several cheerleaders. Well, it just takes it to the next level, and a combination of these 2 can win you the game pretty much. So yeah, it's a pretty good card, pretty good guest. PI, yeah, I think the PI is. I've said haven't I that the value of one money is somewhere between 1 and 2 popularity, and this guy gives you 2 popularity at the cost of 1 money, and it's at a time when you cook, and you're probably going to be bringing him in later in the game when the relative value of popularity increases relative to money. So I think it's better than the driver, but obviously very similar. Rich friend. Yeah, well, I'll put it this way. Generally, in most circumstances, unless you're already maxing out on money or you're relying on mascots, you'd rather have a rich friend than an old friend. And right at the start, it's very valuable, and you want to see a lot of them. But after that, it's just stuff you'd rather not have in your deck. So I think it goes pretty comfortably here. Rockstar obviously goes right alongside these. They serve a very similar purpose. They generate money and some popularity at the expense of trouble. I think because, as I've said, money is more valuable than popularity. This is more valuable. Although for some reason I've definitely bought a lot more Rockstars than I have gamblers. I don't know if that's just because of the kind of games I've been bought in, or maybe because the Rockstar's cheaper, and you're more likely to be getting these in the early game when you care a lot about money. You're more likely to be in a situation where you can afford them. I think in theory the gambler's stronger, but they're very similar. Guard, I think this guy's called. Yeah, I don't know. Booting out's a very. I think booting. I think the reason why the guard isn't as strong as maybe you'd think, because booting out's a very strong ability that can help you deal with trouble, that can help you refine your party. Well, put it this way: its booting ability is good for dealing with trouble, but when do you care most about dealing with trouble? Early on in the party. Early on in the party, you're going to be hitting your capacity, and you're going to be having, rich friends and old friends still make up a large part of your deck. So you're going to be wanting to draw your more valuable cards that you spent money on, that you spent popularity on. Sorry. And you're going to be wanting to make the best value out of every position in the party. And this guy, if you're using him to deal with trouble and you've already used the ability to him, so you can't use him to kick himself out, he's just taking up the space that a potentially more valuable card could take up. So actually, the time when you're most likely going to be using this guy is late on in the game when, well, it depends on if you've got other ways of dealing with trouble. Like if you've got no other ways of dealing with trouble, you're happy to see this guy. But if you've got other ways of dealing with trouble, you're probably going to be using them because they represent better value because of the other abilities that they have. And then by the time you're using it later on in the game and also it doesn't have the advantage that something like the wrestler does of using it to refine your party, because you're not going to be using this to refine your party, because if you're going to be using this guy to get rid of a guest in order to get more yields, the guy you're going to be using it to get rid of is himself because he's not bringing any yields. So you're in the same situation if you hadn't bought him at all. So yeah, I guess in summary, it's a good way of dealing with trouble if you don't have any other ways of dealing with trouble. And dealing with trouble is important, but there's other ways to deal with trouble, so it's not as good as them. Spy, I think, goes here. Money is valuable. The spying abilities are nice to have. I mean, if this guy was just worth 2 money, you wouldn't be happy about buying him, but you'd probably be buying him anyway. So the fact that it also comes with this, which is like a soft ability to deal with trouble and provide some other benefits as well, is just a Brucey bonus. So yeah, I think A, you're happy to see him. Stylist, is this called? Yeah, I think Stylist. Yeah, it's good. It's a good way to scale in the mid game. We really care about scaling. Obviously, it costs you money, unlike something like the photographer, you don't want to be getting it right at the end because you've got to be able to draw it a few turns for it to be able to make a difference. And because you've got to get it into your deck earlier, you're getting to your deck at a time when money is more valuable. So the fact that it costs one money is more of a penalty than it is for the photographer. But that said, this has got a higher potential to make the difference between winning or losing. I said that the photographer is really valuable if you've got one of these cards in your game, one of these really valuable cards in your game. But if you've got one of those cards in your game, you're more likely to be winning anyway. Whereas if you've not got any other good way of scaling, you might be reliant on the stylist. Again, it's really, really valuable with a cheerleader. And another reason why it's really, really good with a cheerleader, if you have other cards with the boot ability or with the magician or something like that, you can use this the stylist's abilities to get someone stronger. And obviously if it's with the cheerleader, you can get them quite a lot stronger. And then you can also use the cheerleader's abilities to refresh the boot ability and then get rid of them so you don't have to pay them money. Although maybe I'm overthinking that a bit, because if you've got this and the cheerleader, you're probably not going to be worrying about money too much because you're almost definitely going to win. Superhero, I think the superhero goes here because it's like the leprechaun, but worse, because as we've said, popularity is less valuable than money. However, you're getting it later in the game, and the difference between the value of money and popularity becomes less later in the game. But I still think it stays. So yeah, I think it goes there. Ticket teller goes here. I think money is really valuable. If you don't have another way of generating money, you're going to be using the ticket teller because you need to, because you need money, but you're not going to be happy about it. It doesn't represent great value, and its value becomes less and less as the game goes on, because at the start when you need money, you're going to be happy to draw it, but then at the end when you're more focused on gaining popularity, you're going to be like, oh god, I've drawn this person. So you don't want too many of them keeping up your deck, cluttering up your deck. But sometimes you need it. So if you see it, you might use it, but you're not going to be happy about it. Unicorn. I think Unicorn's the strongest of the star guests because it's not that much more expensive. It's 5 more expensive than the alien, but for that you're getting the pacifist ability, which, as we've already established from the hippie and the cute dog, is a super valuable ability. Because it gets rid of the risk of you losing turns to trouble or you having to quit early because of trouble. And also it synergizes really well with the bartender and the writer, which is super valuable. I suppose more so the writer for the unicorn, because at that stage you're really focused on trying to get as much popularity as possible. But yeah, I think his extra ability is well worth the extra cost. Yeah, werewolf D, I think. Yeah, four popularity is not that great, and for a cost of 4 popularity, be in trouble half the time obviously makes it better than monkey. It makes it, put it this way, it makes it a question of whether you should get it or not sometimes. Whereas the monkeys, it's never going to be worthwhile. But I'm still not convinced it's worth the trade off. And you're probably going to have better ways of generating popularity than this. So there have been times when I've used it, because similar to a lot of the ones that are in this fillet here, there haven't been better options of generating popularity. But I'd rather have all of these guys that generate popularity in the fillet here than the werewolf, which is why it ends up there. Wild Buddy. Now this might be my hottest take of the whole thing, but I'm going to put the Wild Buddy at the top of D. I think on everyone else's tier list, I've seen the Wild Buddy's been the weakest in the game. But um, at the start of the game, you're really reliant on wild buddies. Imagine if the first few turns wild buddies didn't exist and you were just drawing a load of money, a load of rich friends and old friends. The game would be so slow to get off the ground. So really, you're looking to max out on trouble towards the start, get that extra popularity in, and really get the ball rolling on the game. And then later on in the game, um, if it wasn't for the existence of the wild buddy, the bartender and the writer, which are two of the best cards in the game, would be basically worthless because you'd be dependent on these more expensive and less common um, guys. So I mean, you wouldn't buy any extra because because A, you can't buy an extra, but B, you'd sooner buy one of these guys. But and also, if you have spur um, trouble left at the end of a round and you have the ability to boot people out, you're probably going to be booting out old friends because you want to see some more wild buddies because you want to get that popularity up a bit more. So they have that utility as well. So even though basically the whole way you lose the game is based around them, um, they're more often more useful than these other default characters. Wrestler, S tier. Um, the ability to boot people out is powerful, especially when you have two money. It brings the two popularity in because not only is it a useful trouble control mechanism, unlike the guard, you can then use that to refine and get rid of your weaker members, like your old friends and maybe your rich friends, depending on the game, and try and get some of those more valuable cards. It has that utility as well. So yeah, always happy to see the wrestler. And finally, the writer. Well, I've teased it quite a lot. The writer, I'm going to say, goes here because it scales really well, especially if you've got some pacifists in the desk as well. Frequently, this is going to be your main source of popularity. Yeah, if you've got this and a good way of dealing with money, if you've got the bartender and the right side, I don't know if it's even possible to get those two together. You're going to do all right. So that's my final tier list. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I've overrated anything. Let me know if I've not thought of an application for some of these ones I've put lower down. Thank you for watching.